Have you ever felt pressured to give tithes out of fear that you were stealing from God? Have you been told that if you don't contribute, the gates of heaven will be closed to you? What if I told you that the church hasn't told you the whole truth about tithing? Many Christians live under a burden of guilt and fear, giving not out of love, but out of obligation. Worse, they believe that if they don't pay, God will punish them. But today, you'll discover 3 biblical secrets about tithing that can completely transform your understanding of this practice. What you're about to hear may shock you, but it can also set your faith free once and for all. If you've ever wondered whether you're being manipulated or if tithing is truly an obligation before God, stay with me until the end, because what I'm about to reveal could change your spiritual life forever. The true purpose of tithing in the Old Testament. Most people think of tithing as a financial transaction, a sacred tax paid to the church. But was that God's intention? When we dive into the Bible, we see that tithing was never just about money. It was a system of community support designed to sustain the Levites, provide for the poor, and even fund religious celebrations. Tithing was a system of provision supporting the Levites. The Levites, who served in the temple, had no land of their own, Numbers 18:24. Tithing was God's way of ensuring they had provisions since they were dedicated to full-time ministry, caring for the vulnerable. There was also a triennial tithe, Deuteronomy 14 verses 28 to 29, stored to support orphans, widows, and foreigners. This shows that tithing was as much about social justice as it was about worship. Funding celebrations. Some tithes were even used for festivals and worship, Deuteronomy 14 verses 22 to 27. Part of the tithe was meant to be enjoyed in God's presence, reinforcing gratitude and joy. Tithing was about more than just giving, unlike modern teachings that sometimes portray tithing as a strict requirement for personal blessings. The Old Testament tithe was deeply rooted in community care and worship. It was never about blindly giving out of obligation, but about sharing resources, fostering unity, and ensuring that no one was left behind. The Old Testament tithe wasn't a burden. It was a way for the community to care for one another. But does this system still apply today? Jesus and the New Testament view on tithing. Did Jesus reinforce the Old Testament tithe? Or did he bring a new perspective? His teachings reveal a shift from rigid, obligatory giving to heartfelt generosity. In Matthew 23 verse 23, Jesus rebuked the Pharisees for their legalistic tithing. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give 1/10 of your mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. Jesus wasn't condemning tithing itself, but he exposed a critical flaw. The Pharisees focused on the ritual while ignoring the heart. They were meticulous in giving 1/10 of their herbs but failed to practice love, justice, and faithfulness, the very things that matter most to God. Tithing should be about the heart, not obligation. Jesus praised the widow's offering, Mark 12 verses 41 to 44. Where she gave a small amount but with great faith and sacrifice. He never commanded his disciples to tithe but instead emphasized generosity, love, and serving others. True generosity in Jesus' teachings goes beyond money. It includes our time, love, and compassion. Jesus taught that giving should be a reflection of a transformed heart, not a legalistic duty. His focus was never on a percentage but on the spirit of giving, one that flows from love for God and care for others. So, if Jesus didn't impose a fixed tithe, how should Christians give? By following his example, giving freely, cheerfully, and in a way that meets the needs of others. Generosity should be driven by love, not law. The New Testament encourages free will giving, not tithing. The early church had a radically different approach to giving. Instead of a mandatory tithe, the focus was on free will offerings given from the heart. Giving was an act of love, not a legal requirement. Paul made this clear in 2 Corinthians 9 verse 7. Each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. Key differences between Old and New Testament giving. No fixed percentage. Giving is based on what each person decides in their heart, rather than a set 10% requirement. No fear of curses. Unlike in the Old Testament, blessings are not tied to a specific financial contribution. Focus on the needy. Offerings were often used to help struggling believers, Romans 15 verses 25 to 27, not to maintain religious institutions. The early Christians shared what they had willingly, Acts 2 verses 44 to 45, selling their possessions to care for those in need. There was no pressure, no manipulation, only love and generosity. Sadly, today some churches distort this message, teaching that giving money guarantees God's blessings. But nowhere in the Bible does God say that financial giving is a requirement for His favor. God blesses those who trust in Him, not those who give out of fear or obligation. True biblical giving is about generosity, not guilt. It is an opportunity to reflect God's love and support those in need, not a transaction to earn His blessings. When we give freely and joyfully, we align with the spirit of New Testament giving. So, should Christians tithe today? The New Testament does not command tithing. Instead, it encourages joyful, voluntary giving that flows from a heart of gratitude. God desires generosity that comes from love, not obligation. 2 Corinthians 9 verse 7 reminds us, "Each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion. For God loves a cheerful giver." So the real question is, why do you give? Out of fear or out of love? Out of obligation or out of joy? God doesn't measure your faith by how much you give, but by why you give. True giving is an act of worship, an expression of trust in God's provision, and a way to bless others. When we give with the right heart, we reflect God's generosity towards us. Proverbs 3 verse 9 says, "Honor the Lord with your wealth and with the first fruits of all your produce." Now, I'd love to hear from you.